Driving alone at night always felt a bit creepy, but that night, the feeling was stronger. I was on a long stretch of highway that seemed endless. There were no other cars, no streetlights, just my headlights cutting through the darkness. The road was quiet, the only sound was the hum of my engine and the rustle of the wind. I'd been driving for hours, and my eyes were getting heavy. I rolled down the window to let in some fresh air, hoping it would keep me awake. The cold night air bit at my skin, but it was better than falling asleep at the wheel. As I rounded a bend, I noticed a faint light up ahead. It flickered like a candle. As I got closer, I realized it was a car parked on the side of the road with its hazard lights flashing. I slowed down, thinking whether I should stop to help. It was late, and the nearest town was miles away. Someone might need help. I pulled over and got out of the car. The night was silent except for the clicking of the hazard lights. I walked up to the car carefully. It looked old and beat up. I looked inside and saw that it was empty. There was no one around. My gut told me to get back in my car and leave, but my curiosity got the better of me. I looked around, calling out to see if anyone was nearby, but there was no answer. Just then, I heard a rustling noise from the trees beside the road. My heart started pounding. I called out again, but there was still no response. Feeling it was too dangerous to stay any longer, I turned to head back to my car. That's when I noticed a glint of something shiny under the parked car. Kneeling down, I saw a small, shiny object. It was a keychain with a key still attached. It seemed out of place, like it had been dropped in a hurry. As I stood up, a sudden, loud noise echoed through the night. It sounded like a gunshot. I froze, my heart racing. In the distance, I saw a figure running through the trees, moving fast, away from the road. Without thinking, I sprinted back to my car, jumped in, and slammed the door. My hands shook as I fumbled with the keys, finally starting the engine. I sped off, my mind racing. Who was that person? Why were they running? And what was that noise? As I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something dangerous. Eventually, I reached the next town, my heart still pounding. I pulled into a gas station and took a moment to calm down. The bright lights and the sight of other people made me feel a bit safer. I called the local police and reported what I'd seen, giving them the location of the abandoned car. The officer on the phone assured me they would send someone to check it out. As I hung up, I realized how lucky I was. I had trusted my instincts and left before anything could happen. Driving away from the gas station, I felt a sense of relief. The highway stretched out before me again, but this time, I was more alert, more cautious. The night felt a bit less threatening now, and I was determined to reach my destination safely. But as I drove, the image of that running figure and the loud noise kept replaying in my mind. Just when I thought I could relax, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. A pair of headlights appeared, distant but steadily getting closer. They seemed to be following me. I sped up, but so did the car behind me. My heart raced again. I realized my escape might not be over yet. The sense of relief I felt earlier vanished, replaced by a chilling fear that someone, or something, was still out there, and it wasn't done with me yet. Driving down a dark, empty highway at midnight isn't something I usually do, but tonight was different. The late shift at work had me leaving later than usual, and I was tired. The road stretched out before me, lit only by my headlights. There was a creepy quiet that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. After a while, I noticed a car in my rearview mirror. Its headlights were bright, almost blinding, and it seemed to be getting closer. I moved to the right lane to let it pass, but it stayed right behind me. I felt a prickle of fear. Maybe it was just someone in a hurry, but why hadn't they passed me yet? I sped up, hoping to get some distance between us. The car matched my speed, staying right on my tail. My heart began to race. I told myself not to panic, but it was hard to stay calm. I kept checking my mirrors, hoping the car would back off or pass, but it didn't. Then, out of nowhere, the car swerved into the left lane and pulled up beside me. I glanced over, trying to get a look at the driver, but the windows were too dark to see inside. My mind raced with possibilities. Was this some kind of road rage? A drunk driver? The car suddenly jerked back behind me and then began to flash its high beams over and over. The lights were blinding, making it hard to see the road ahead. I slowed down, thinking maybe they wanted me to pull over. But stopping on an empty highway in the middle of the night seemed like a terrible idea. Without warning, the car rammed into my rear bumper. The hit jolted me forward, and I struggled to keep control of my car. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the steering wheel. I had to do something, and fast. I saw an exit sign up ahead and decided to take it. I signaled and veered off the highway, hoping the other car wouldn't follow. As I sped down the ramp, I glanced in the mirror. The car stayed on the highway, speeding past the exit. I felt a wave of relief, but I didn't slow down until I reached a well-lit gas station a few miles down the road. I parked near the entrance and locked the doors. My hands were shaking, and my heart was still pounding. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to calm down. I called the police and reported what had happened. They took my information and assured me they'd send a patrol car to check the area. I felt a bit better knowing they were on it. Eventually, I made it home safely. I kept thinking about how easily things could have gone wrong. From then on, I made sure to avoid late-night drives on empty highways. It wasn't worth the risk. The next morning, I was shaken awake by a call from the police. They had found a car matching my description abandoned by the side of the highway, but there was no sign of the driver. The officer mentioned in passing that the car was reported stolen a week ago, and the owner had gone missing. The thought of what could have happened sent chills down my spine. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching, waiting. The fear of that unknown stayed with me, making every night drive a haunting reminder of how close I came to disappearing too. I was driving down Route 66 late at night, and it always creeped me out. The road seemed to go on forever, with just the occasional flicker of my headlights and the soft hum of the engine for company. Approaching an old, rusty sign that said, "Next gas station 50 miles. My heart sank. The fuel gauge was dangerously low. I kept going, hoping to reach the next town before I ran out of gas. Minutes turned into hours in the darkness. Suddenly, a thick fog rolled in, making it hard to see. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, peering through the mist for any signs of the road ahead. Then I saw it, a figure standing by the roadside. My heart skipped a beat as I drove past, catching a glimpse of a tattered jacket and an old hat. A hitchhiker, maybe, but who would be out here at this hour? A chill ran down my spine. I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the figure was gone. Had they vanished into the fog or slipped back into the darkness? The engine coughed and died. Panic surged as the car coasted to a stop. Out of gas. In the eerie silence, I cursed and checked my phone. No signal. I was truly alone, stranded on this lonely highway. I decided to walk, hoping to find help. The fog obscured everything, making every step uncertain. Time dragged on as I trudged forward, my senses on edge with every shadow and sound. Suddenly, headlights cut through the mist, a truck slowing down as it approached. Relief flooded over me as I waved desperately, explaining my situation to the driver. He nodded and offered to take me to the next gas station. During the drive, he shared stories of strange happenings along this deserted road. I listened, uneasy but grateful for his company and the warmth of the truck's heater against the cold night. Eventually, the lights of a small town appeared on the horizon. The driver dropped me off at a gas station, where I filled my tank and thanked him profusely. Glancing back at the dark highway, now distant and quiet, I realized how close I had come to a different fate. As I drove away, relieved to leave the eerie highway behind, a chill ran down my spine again. In the rearview mirror, for a split second, I thought I saw a faint figure standing by the road where the truck had picked me up. but as quickly as I noticed, it vanished into the night. It was a dark and stormy night. I was driving down a highway I didn't know. The rain hit my windshield hard, and my wipers were working fast. I squinted through the rain, trying to see the road. The headlights barely cut through the darkness, showing just enough of the wet road to keep me moving. I was coming back from a business trip that ended late, and my GPS sent me on a different route because of a crash on my usual way. This new route took me through a lonely stretch of road with no streetlights, no signs, and it seemed like it would never end. The uneasy feeling in my gut grew stronger with each passing mile. The highway was empty. Not a single car in sight. The only sound was the steady beating of the rain and the occasional rumble of thunder. I glanced at the clock on my dashboard, 2:13 a.m. I hadn't seen a rest stop or a gas station for miles, and my gas gauge was just above empty. I was about to turn on the radio to break the silence when I noticed something strange in the distance. A flickering light. As I got closer, I realized it was a car with its hazard lights on, pulled over to the side of the road. I slowed down, thinking about whether to stop and help. It seemed like the right thing to do, but a voice in my head told me to keep going. I pulled over anyway, just a few feet behind the stopped car. I stepped out into the rain, pulling my jacket tighter around me. The cold water quickly soaked through my shoes as I walked toward the car. The windows were fogged up, and I couldn't see inside. I knocked on the driver's side window, but there was no response. I tried the door handle. It was unlocked. I opened the door carefully and looked inside. The car was empty. A chill ran down my spine. Why would someone leave their car in the middle of nowhere during a storm? I checked the back seat and found a phone and a purse. It looked like the owner had left in a hurry, but there were no signs of where they might have gone. I called out, my voice barely rising above the sound of the rain, but there was no answer. My heart was pounding. I decided to get back to my car and call for help. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye in the distance. A faint light moving through the trees. I hesitated for a moment, then started walking towards it, hoping it was the car's owner looking for help. I stumbled through the mud and bushes, following the light. After what felt like forever, I reached a small clearing. In the middle of it stood an old, abandoned cabin with a flickering lantern hanging by the door. The door was slightly open. I took a deep breath and pushed it open, calling out as I did. Inside, the cabin was empty except for a few pieces of broken furniture. The air was damp and musty. I walked around, shining my phone's flashlight into every corner, but there was no sign of anyone. Just as I was about to leave, I noticed a piece of paper on the floor, partially covered by dirt. I picked it up and saw that it was a map of the area with a route marked in red. It led back to the highway, but there was an X marked about a mile away from where I had left my car. I didn't know what to make of it, but I felt an overwhelming urge to follow the marked path. I made my way back to the highway, rain still pouring down, and got into my car. I drove slowly, watching the mile markers closely. Exactly 1 mile down the road, I saw it, a small, unmarked turnoff that I had completely missed before. I took the turn and followed a narrow, winding road that led me to another clearing. There, sitting in the middle, was another car, identical to the one I had stopped at earlier. Its hazard lights were still on, flashing in the darkness. I got out and walked toward the car, my heart racing. As I got closer, I noticed a person sitting in the driver's seat, head resting on the steering wheel. I knocked on the window, and the person slowly lifted their head. It was me. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, my mind spinning. How was this possible? Before I could make sense of it, the figure in the car smiled, a calm, knowing smile. I felt a strange sense of fear wash over me. The rain started to let up, and the sky began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. I looked back at the car, but it was gone, replaced by the empty clearing once more. I took a deep breath and got back into my car. As I drove away, the storm finally broke, and the morning sun began to rise. I didn't understand what had happened that night, but I knew one thing for sure. I was glad to be leaving that highway behind. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time. I could see the silhouette of the abandoned car in the clearing, its hazard lights still flickering. The figure inside was gone, but a cold shiver ran down my spine as I realized that I hadn't escaped at all. The eyes staring back at me in the mirror weren't my own. They were dark, hollow, and unblinking, watching my every move. It was a long drive home from the city, and I was already worn out. The highway stretched out ahead, dark and empty, with only the occasional headlights of passing cars. The clock on the dashboard showed 11:45 p.m. I had a couple of hours left before I could finally crawl into bed. The night was oddly quiet, the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. As the minutes passed, my eyelids grew heavy, and I struggled to stay focused on the road. The steady hum of the tires on the road and the low rumble of the engine didn't help my drowsiness. Suddenly, my car's dashboard lit up with warning lights. The fuel gauge was almost on empty. I cursed under my breath, realizing I had forgotten to fill up before leaving the city. There wasn't another gas station for miles, but I had no choice but to keep going and hope I'd make it to the next one. The highway cut through thick forest on both sides, the tall trees standing like silent guards. Every so often, the headlights would catch something in the bushes, a deer, a raccoon, or maybe just a trick of the light. I tried to ignore the growing unease. A few miles later, I saw a sign for a rest area with a gas station up ahead. Relief washed over me as I took the exit and pulled into the small, dimly lit station. The place was deserted, which wasn't surprising given the time. I parked by one of the pumps and got out to start filling the tank. As the gas flowed, I looked around. The rest area had a small building with restrooms and vending machines, the windows dark. I decided to stretch my legs and walk toward the building. The night air was cool and fresh, a nice change from the stuffy car. When I reached the building, I noticed something odd. The door to the men's restroom was slightly open, and there was a faint light coming from inside. Curious, I stepped closer and peeked through the crack. Inside, the fluorescent light flickered off and on, casting creepy shadows on the walls. I hesitated for a moment, then pushed the door open wider. The restroom was empty, but what I saw made my blood run cold. Written on the mirror in what looked like dried mud were the words, "Help me!" My heart pounded as I backed out of the restroom. This wasn't a prank. Someone had been here, someone who needed help. But there was no one around now, and I wasn't about to play hero in the middle of the night. I quickly walked back to my car, glancing over my shoulder the whole way. I finished pumping the gas, got back into the car, and sped off. As I got back onto the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move, every rustle in the bushes sounded like footsteps. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone, or something, following me. Finally, after what felt like forever, I saw the lights of a town up ahead. The anxiety that had gripped me began to ease as I entered the outskirts and saw signs of life. Other cars, open shops, and people going about their business. I pulled into a well-lit parking lot and parked the car, my hands still shaking. I never found out what happened at that rest area or who wrote that message on the mirror. Maybe it was a prank, or maybe someone really was in trouble. But one thing stayed with me, the feeling that someone, or something, had been there, watching me. As I sat in my car, the engine still running, I thought about the night. I realized that no matter how safe and prepared I thought I was, there are things out there that you can't predict. And sometimes, those things are closer than you think. Late at night, I found myself driving down Highway 66, and it wasn't a thrill. The road ahead was dark and empty, surrounded by thick woods. My headlights cut through the darkness, casting strange shadows that flickered in the corners of my vision. The radio crackled with static, making me feel uneasy. As I turned a corner, my headlights caught someone standing by the roadside. A hitchhiker, maybe? I slowed down, but as I got closer, they vanished into the woods. A shiver ran down my spine, and I hit the gas, heart racing. A few minutes later, I spotted a car parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights blinking. Something didn't feel right, but I slowed down to see if they needed help. As I passed by, the driver's side door swung open, but there was no one inside. Panic gripped me, and I sped away, the image burning into my mind. Further down the road, I saw a woman in a white dress standing in the middle of the highway, her face hidden by long, dark hair. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. But just as my car screeched to a stop, she vanished into thin air. Sweat dripped down my forehead as I tried to make sense of what I'd just witnessed. I pressed on, eager to escape this surreal nightmare. Suddenly, my headlights illuminated a sign. "Welcome to Silent Creek, 10 miles ahead." Relief washed over me. Civilization was close. But as I approached, the road abruptly ended, blocked by fallen trees and bushes grown wild. Panic seized me when I realized there was no way forward. I turned to go back, but the road behind me had disappeared, swallowed by darkness. Trembling, I searched desperately for any sign of escape. Then, in the distance, I saw faint lights approaching. A tow truck emerged from the darkness, the driver signaling me to follow. With no other choice, I cautiously trailed behind. The road seemed to materialize beneath us as we drove, until finally, we reached a familiar highway junction. I pulled over, thanking the tow truck driver repeatedly. He nodded silently and drove off into the night. I sat in my car, shaking with relief and disbelief at the ordeal I had just endured. As I watched the taillights fade into the distance, a chill crept down my spine, knowing I had escaped something inexplicable and terrifying. The sky was pitch black, and the only light came from my car's dashboard and the occasional street lamp flickering in the distance. I was driving down an empty highway, miles from the nearest town. It had been a long day at work, and I was worn out, but the thought of getting home kept me pushing the gas pedal. The road seemed to go on forever, a thin strip of asphalt cutting through the darkness around me. My headlights lit up the path just enough to see the yellow lines marking the lanes. The radio was playing softly, but the music did little to ease the uneasy feeling crawling up my back. Suddenly, I saw something on the side of the road. At first, it looked like a big bag or some junk. As I got closer, I realized it was a car, flipped over and smashed up, like it had been thrown aside. The sight made my heart race. There was no other vehicle around, no sign of what might have caused the accident. I slowed down, not sure if I should stop. My mind was spinning with thoughts. What if someone was hurt? What if they needed help? I couldn't just drive past and act like I hadn't seen it. I pulled over and grabbed my phone, but of course, there was no signal out here. Gathering my courage, I grabbed a flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out of the car. The night air was cold, and the silence was almost crushing. I walked up to the wreck slowly, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. As I got closer, I saw that the car was empty. The driver's side door was open, hanging loosely. I looked around, but there was no sign of anyone nearby. It was like the driver had just disappeared. A sense of dread washed over me. I felt exposed, vulnerable in the wide emptiness of the night. I scanned the area one last time before deciding to head back to my car. As I turned to leave, my flashlight caught something shiny in the grass a few feet away. It was a cell phone, its screen cracked but still working. I picked it up, and as the screen lit up, I saw a missed call and a text message notification. The text was from an unknown number and simply said, "Help." Chills ran down my spine. Someone had been here, and they were in trouble. I didn't know what to do. Without cell service, I couldn't call for help. I decided the best thing I could do was drive to the nearest town and get the police. As I got back into my car and drove away, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone or something following me. The drive seemed to take forever, each mile dragging on longer than the last. Finally, I saw the lights of a small town in the distance. I pulled into the first gas station I found and rushed inside to call the police. The officers arrived quickly, and I led them back to the accident scene. They found no trace of the driver, just the same eerie emptiness I had seen. They took my statement and promised to look into it further. Days later, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I kept thinking about the flipped car, the missing driver, and the strange text message. Then, one evening, I got a call from the police. They had found the driver, confused but alive, several miles from the accident site. He had wandered into the forest, dazed and lost, but eventually made his way to a farmhouse where he got help. The driver had no memory of the crash or the hours that followed. The police guessed he had hit his head and wandered off in a state of shock. It was a relief to know he was safe, but the whole experience left a mark on me. It was a stark reminder of how fragile and unpredictable life can be, especially on a lonely highway in the middle of the night. But something still didn't sit right. I kept thinking about that text message. If the driver was the one who sent it, why couldn't he remember? And if it wasn't him, then who was it? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the overturned car and the empty road. It made me wonder, if I had stayed a little longer, would I have found something else? Or worse, would something have found me? The thought keeps me awake at night, replaying that eerie scene over and over.